Sacred geometry was preserved throughout history in Freemasonic circles, since it was believed to be important knowledge revealing the secrets of our universe. The secret of sacred geometry is that vibrations or sounds form geometric patterns. Goethe reputedly said that indeed geometry is frozen music. Music is geometry and geometry is music. The basis of the universe is form and pattern. Both are organs of perception, and the phenomenal world we perceive seem to be best understood as systems of pure pattern, or as geometric structures of form and proportion. Due to this, many ancient cultures chose to examine reality through the metaphors of geometry and music. Sound, like word and rhythm, forms the trinity of the shamanic power of language. Sound of a certain octave is reputedly able to produce psychic, psychological, or emotional effects, and also freeze water, kill a man, or break down walls, as in the biblical legend of Jericho. The frequency of 432 Hz is deeply intertwined in nature. However, most music worldwide has been tuned to 440 Hz since the International Standards Organization endorsed it in 1953, following the prior recommendation of the Nazi Party spokesman Joseph Goebbels in 1939. Research suggests that the international standard of 440 Hz tuning generates a deliberate unhealthy effect in the environment and human physiology. According to Brian T. Hollins, it brings about an unnatural 8 Hz change in how we think and how our DNA regulates our genetic makeup. The structure of certain sacred architecture contains within it complex geometry which mimic the biogeometry of life and generate harmonics that have a noticeable effect on people's states of awareness. When combined with the chants and mantras, people could quite literally massively amplify their consciousness. There is pervading the whole universe a single homogeneous resonance, a sound or tone which acts, so to speak, as the awakener or vivifying power, stirring all the molecules into action. Without this resonance or motion amongst the quiescent particles, there would be no visible universe. Alexander Lauterwasser writes in The Creative Music of the Universe, at the physical level, the intricacies, beauty, and interrelationships of what could be called the superconscious designs of the universe are gradually being revealed. From this perspective, there is no essential difference between the structure of an atom, galaxy, a chakra, a crop circle, or even the Sufi whirling dervish ceremony. It is only a matter of scale and perception. As above, so below. Within these phenomena lies something, some process perhaps that suggests the superconscious design with its fundamental archetypal patterns and displays of unity. Professor Robert Moon at the University of Chicago has demonstrated that the entire periodic table of elements, literally everything in the physical world, is based on these same 5 forms. Sacred geometric shapes can occupy both a static and dynamic position. The static position is a low entropy state, whereas the dynamic position is a high entropy state. Hence, geometry can be used for both destructive and creative purposes. To give an empirical example related to the dodecahedron, Moon showed that the last natural element of the periodic table, uranium, was based on the form of 2 connected dodecahedra being torn apart. This rupture creates a toxic nuclear radiation. Interestingly enough, the most intriguing of all platonic solids and the most mystically significant is the dodecahedron, i.e. the 5th element, aether. The ancient Greeks considered knowledge of the dodecahedron a closely guarded secret and feared that this pattern could cause tremendous destruction if misused. Only hints at this pattern's existence were given publicly, as in Plato's famous statement that the Earth seen from above appears like a 12-sided leather ball. Modern Russian scientific research has discovered that there is indeed a dodecahedral pattern to the Earth's crust. The Earth is a living crystal, with energy meridians much like the human body. Further to this, findings in 2003 from NASA reveal that the shape of the universe is a dodecahedron based on phi, the golden ratio. The dodecahedron was also found to have importance in relation to DNA. Dr. White mapped out the relationship between the amino acids across the 3D surface and found that it formed a dodecahedron. The universe is a dodecahedron, the Earth is a dodecahedron, DNA folds into the dodecahedron. As above, so below. As you sit here, millions of cells are splitting, undergoing mitosis, and the whole process is being guided by hyperdimensional geometry. Phi, the golden ratio 1.618, is the universal constant of the design within the physical, i.e. phi cycle, reality. Phi can be found throughout the universe, from the spirals of galaxies to the spiral of a Nautilus seashell, from the harmony of music to the beauty in art, from the microscopic to the macrocosmic. The constant symmetry of the golden ratio throughout nature also attests to the holographic nature of reality. In the 15th century, Fibonacci discovered that if you add 1 to itself, then 2 to 1, then the sum 3 to 2, and the sum 5 to 3, etc., then you end up with a series of numbers 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, etc. The ratios of these one to another dance around and approach more and more closely to the golden ratio. These ratios describe the most efficient way of packing spirals about.
I showed you some really cool, geometrically perfect crop circles in the Flower of Life form. Most people didn't like that, or care. So instead, I offer you this. This intense drawing was done by Leonardo da Vinci, proving that he actually studied the Flower of Life form. In fact, over 200 drawings of his were found, all studying different angles and proportions, complete with descriptions of each one. The editor of the book who published these lost drawings didn't really know what they were, so he just said this is how he came up with his gear inventions. Leonardo was able to invent such intricate inventions and designs because he studied divine proportion. Also, Leonardo was a master mason, and it's clear that he most likely got his original knowledge from them. Is the Flower of Life, among other things, the secret information that the Masons have been keeping secret for the last 1,000 years? Today, I was going to look at spirals and sequences found all throughout the universe, which is pretty important, but at the last minute I decided to change it because I want to show you something else. Now, in the comments or end credits, depending on where you're watching this, I posted links to a TED Talks video by Garrett Lacey, a particle physicist who tells us of an amazing discovery in the scientific field. I want to show you and talk about his findings, and then we'll look at dimensions after that. Okay, so Garrett has discovered that by examining coral, they found that each coral head has thousands of different polyps. These polyps are constantly budding and branching into genetically identical neighbors. Through performing heat experiments on these polyps, they were able to find that every single polyp is part of a whole, a single unit of being, but each one is experiencing its own reality individually. From their findings with the coral, they were able to look at quantum mechanics. See, the mathematics of quantum mechanics shows us exactly how our universe works, and we see that everything in the reality is just continually branching into new possibilities, just like the coral. As humans, we are individually experiencing only one of these possibilities, much like the individual polyps. What physics is telling us is that everything comes down to geometry and the interactions between elementary particles. Things can happen only when things are perfectly balanced. So Garrett starts showing us some subatomic particles and the things that make up electrons and protons and neutrons. We always consider these to be the smallest particle, but we never think about what's creating them. Garrett demonstrates to us how the particles that create point particles really work. He shows that when you plot them out in how they move, this is what they look like. At the tiniest scales of the universe, in how it works, is very beautiful. Now, look at this. This is one of the ways that these charges branch off from each other. As you can see, it flows in a hexagonal pattern, the same pattern that we found in the expanded Flower of Life. Then, if you rotate this pattern in 6-dimensional charge space, you see it forms yet another pattern. Many of you will recognize this as the shape of the Star of David, but its true name is the star tetrahedron, which maps perfectly over the fruit of life. This entire pattern created by the particles is mapped across over precise places on a 200-dimensional spherical shape scientists have called E8, of which also has a geometric shape. By rotating that shape as well, you can see how there are nearly infinite possibilities as to how these elementary particles interact with each other. The details of the reality begin to take form. Now, as this shape is rotating in 8 dimensions, you can see a myriad of different patterns here. Look at this one in particular. This looks a lot like Metatron's cube, doesn't it? At the heart of particle physics is pure, beautiful geometry. By now, you probably can begin to see where sacred geometry falls into this. Where do these shapes originate? Do they just come into being at random? Or does the first shape come from somewhere else? In Lesson 6, we talked about the Flower of Life, the original, perfect geometric symmetry that created the universe. This shape, as we learned, is not only the root of all mathematical proportion, light, the Platonic solids, but is also the source of every musical system in the universe, including systems both used and unknown to modern man. It is also the source of energy patterns and, well, everything. It all comes from the Flower of Life. I believe this is what is at the heart of what's forming every subatomic particle formation, and it probably goes at least a few levels deeper than what Garrett is showing us. Now we can start talking about dimensions. These wheels are some of the oldest symbols known. The only places that they've been found is on the ceilings of certain very old Egyptian tombs. They are always found in sets of 4 or 8, and nobody knows what they are. Even the most famous Egyptologists have no idea, but this is actually proof that the Egyptians not only understood the Flower of Life, but they lived it. Today, I'm going to show you what these wheels meant, and in future lessons, we will go over the details of this unraveling. There's a lot to cover before we get there though. For the record, the unraveling looks like this. Yeah, it's a doozy. So on the walls with these wheels are drawings of 7 people with animal heads. They're called neiters, and each of them has an orangish-red oval above its head. This is called the egg of metamorphosis. The neiters are showing us a time when we go through a certain stage of resurrection, which is a rapid biological change into a different life form. Not the average type of resurrection, I know. As you can see here, they're changing directions 90 degrees, and in doing so, they're changing dimensions. See, the dimensional levels are separated by 90 degrees. Musical notes are separated by 90 degrees. The chakras are also 90 degrees. It's a number that continually appears. Probably at this point we should get a common understanding of what dimensions are, like 3rd dimension, 4th dimension, 5th dimension. What are we talking about here? Most people think of dimension in terms of time and space, the x, y, and z axis, with time becoming the fourth dimension. This is not what we are talking about. What we're seeing as the various dimensional levels has more to do with music and harmonics than anything else. A piano has 8 white keys from C to C, which is the familiar octave, and in between there are 5 black keys. Together this creates what is called the chromatic scale, which is 13 notes, well actually 12, with the 13th being the first in the next octave. So from one C to the next is really 13 steps, not 8. This also correlates with the 7, 8, and 13 chakra system I mentioned in lesson 2. Keeping that in mind, I want to show you a sine wave. Sine waves correspond with light and the electromagnetic spectrum and the vibration of sound. We're all very familiar with this. In this entire reality we're in, every single thing is based on sine waves. There are no exceptions to this except for maybe spirit and void. Quantum physics and quantum mechanics looks at everything in the reality of one of two ways. You can look at anything, like the computer you're watching this video on, to be made up of tiny particles like atoms. Or you can forget about that idea completely and look at it as a vibration, a waveform, such as electromagnetic fields or even sound. If you look at it as atoms, the laws can be seen to fit that model. But if you look at it as waveforms, the laws can be seen to fit that model. Both of these systems come out of the flower of life, one being the one we just looked at, fruit of life to Metatron's cube and beyond, and the other being this beautiful mess of a picture. Just looking at it hurts my head. Everything in this world is a waveform, or can be seen as sound. All things, your bodies, planets, absolutely everything, are a waveform. If you choose this particular way of looking at reality, and then superimpose that view over the reality of the harmonics of music, we can begin to talk about dimensions. The dimensional levels are nothing but different base rate wavelengths. The only difference between this dimension and any other is the length of its basic waveform. It's just like a radio set. Turn the dial, you pick up a wavelength. It's the same with dimensions. If you were to change the wavelength of your consciousness, and in doing so change all of your body patterns to a wavelength different from this universe, you would literally disappear out of this world and reappear in the one you were tuned in. It's been theorized that the base rate wavelength that we're currently living in is 7.23 centimeters. There's a few reasons for this. In a spiritual sense, the 7.23 wavelength is Om, the Hindu sound of the universe. Maybe that's why Oming is such a powerful tool in meditation. Not only that, but if you were to take 100 people and measure the distance between their eyes, the average length is 7.23. Same with the distance from the tip of our chins to the tip of our noses, and the distance across our palms and between our chakras. This 7.23 length is located throughout our bodies in various ways because we are immersed within this particular dimension. There's another reason as well. Bell Laboratories found this wavelength when they were setting up the microwave system around the United States. They found the static in their system because they chose a wavelength just slightly longer than 7.23 for their system. In order to get rid of the static, they did something that we as a planet are still suffering from. They upped the power 50,000 times over what we would normally need, which created a very powerful field, so that the 7.23 wavelength would not interfere. It's for those reasons that I believe 7.23 is the wavelength of our dimension. As you go up in dimensional levels, the wavelength gets shorter and shorter, with higher and higher energy. As you go down in levels, the wavelength gets longer and longer, with lower and lower energy, more and more dense. Just as with a piano, there's a space between the notes, so that when you hit one note, there's a very definite place where the next note is. In this waveform universe we exist in, there's a very definite place where the next dimensional level exists. It's specific wavelength relative to this one. Most cultures in the cosmos have a basic understanding of this and understand how to change between dimensions. However, because of certain events that happened on Earth 13,000 years ago, we have all forgotten, but we're about to remember. So if we show each note in the chromatic scale as a circle, we have 13 circles. Each circle represents a white or black key, and the shaded circle at the end would be the 13th note that begins the next octave. This circle here represents the third dimension. This is where we are, and this circle next to it would be the fourth. In lesson 3, we talked about channeling, and this is typically where channeled beings are. This is also where you explore when you are astral projecting or lucid dreaming. You'll notice now that the musical system goes upwards and downwards forever, octaves over octaves over octaves. Theoretically, this is how the universe goes too, an infinite spectrum of universes in both directions going upwards and downwards forever. I mean, come on, we thought our universe was big, but everything in our universe, as far as we can see, well, that's just this one dimension. You may have heard people talk about 144 dimensions and how 144 relates to other spiritual subjects. This is because there are 12 notes in an octave and 12 overtones between each note. 12 times 12 equals 144 dimensional levels. To be specific, there are 12 major dimensions and 132 minor dimensions within each octave, though in truth this progression probably goes on forever. The diagram we've been looking at represents one octave. The 13th note repeats, and then there's another octave after that. Looks like I'm about done for the day. I want to show you this. I was watching Ancient Aliens not long ago, and one of the natives who has communication with beings in higher dimensions told the man who was interviewing him
that they have always been here, even right here where we're sitting right now, but you just don't see them. They're in a different frequency.
And no one really got what
really mean, or it's what we would mean if we were people saying the words, holding the faith. In other words, it's staying in the vibration of expectation, even though there's no evidence yet to support it. It's where trust comes in. It's trusting that this good feeling has to lead to what I'm really looking for. And sometimes you've trained yourself to be very practical. In other words, people around you have really encouraged you to face reality. We know that they have. And they want you to put your money where your mouth is. They want you to tell it like it is. And so we know you are living in a world that's really not yet oriented in a very open way to understanding the power of vibration and the power of feeling. So we know it does take some trust and some faith in the face of the absence of something that you want. But we promise you, if you can just hang in there and feel a little better and feel a little better and feel a little better, the evidence must come. It is law. It has to come, you see. We can say to you, and we're giving this to you accurately and specifically, that what's been happening to you is that you have fanned the flames of your desire so that there is a bright pulsing light there. In other words, there's strong pulling too. There is, because of the amount of time that you've spent identifying what you want and your deliberate work on processes that have activated what you really want, that part of the equation is really pulling strong. And that is, in fact, the reason that you're feeling so much discomfort in the absence of the evidence that you're looking for. But there's good news in that, which says the energy is pulling so strong that in the moment you release your resistance, you're going to move right there fast. In other words, it's going to be one of those things that's going to go boom. You're going to say, I had no idea it was that close. But getting to the point to which you get to the releasing of resistance is the only time factor. So what we always recommend to someone who has this strong energy pulling and still this pattern of resistance is get off the subject for a while. Find something else that is interesting to give your attention to. Distract yourself, because what's happening every time you focus upon this subject of importance, you amplify the crevasse between where you are and where you want to be, and you don't make any progress. So we want to say to you, step one is well in place. Oh boy, is it well in place. Source energy is fully behind it. The manifestation will be significant when it unfolds for you. In other words, there won't be some gentle unfolding. It's going to be significant. People are going to be startled who are watching nearby. But the amount of time that it takes is really about how long it takes you to chill out. It's close. Just don't worry about how close it is. Distract yourself in the meantime and get ready for amazement as it comes. That's the way these things play out. We're not kidding you. We have this knowing.